In the heart of Imperial Russia, a shadow looms over the monarchy. A radical group is determined to dismantle the Tsarist regime by any means necessary. On one fateful day, the campaign of violence reaches its climax. On March 13th, 1881, Tsar Alexander II is assassinated in St. Petersburg. Alexander II assumes the Russian throne in 1855 at age 36. He is a more liberal and reform-minded leader than his oppressive predecessor. He ends the cantonist system of military conscription. He abolishes serfdom, granting freedom to millions. He expands railroads and makes judicial reforms. Life for most Jews in the empire improves during his reign. A terrorist group called the People's Will forms in Russia in 1879. It seeks to overthrow the Tsarist government through a peasant revolt. Members murder officials and make repeated attempts to assassinate the Tsar. On March 13, 1881, the People's Will succeeds by throwing a bomb at Alexander II's carriage in St. Petersburg. His 36-year-old son, Alexander III, becomes Tsar. He rejects many of his father's reforms. The assassins are arrested and hanged. The People's Will is a precursor to Vladimir Lenin and the Russian Revolution of 1917. Stay tuned, because coming up, we'll learn more about Alexander II's assassination. There are some surprising details that you won't want to miss. Also, we'll learn more about the horrific Cantonist military schools. And finally, we'll learn a bit more about life for Jews in the Russian Empire under Alexander II. Don't forget to check out Today in History in my Teachers Pay Teachers store. There's a link in the description. All right, let's learn more about this Cantonist education system. It goes all the way back to the year 1721. The system requires underage sons of most soldiers in the Russian military to be educated in these special Cantonist boarding schools. Now, most of those soldiers are conscripts, which means they had been forced into the military themselves. So with their sons conscripted as well, this cycle essentially becomes self-sustaining. At these schools, boys are prepared for military service that will last between 3 and 25 years once they turn 18. The length of service depends on the social class or the military rank of the father. Ethnic minority groups like the Romani, Poles, Jews, and others are also incorporated into this Cantonist system. Jews, in fact, are required to meet a quota of boys ages 12 to 18. The boys are then sent to these boarding schools where they receive a Russian and Christian education and are conscripted into the military. Not surprisingly, the Jewish boys get the full 25 years of military service at age 18. This Jewish quota requires 4 boys per 1,000 people per year. Perhaps the most tragic part about this system is how these quotas were sometimes filled. Jewish leaders forced to meet the quotas at times hire kidnappers to take the children. Sometimes boys as young as 7 or 8 were kidnapped and taken to these schools. The system becomes more and more unpopular with the Russian people. Russia also begins facing some international criticism for the practice. Additionally, Russia's crushing defeat in the Crimean War demonstrates a need to overhaul the military. Tsar Alexander II ends the Cantonist system in 1857. This is just 2 years after assuming the throne and just 1 year after losing the Crimean War. Under Alexander II, Jews have more educational opportunities and economic freedom. Before Alexander II's reign, Jews in the Russian Empire had to live in an area known as the Pale of Settlement, which is comprised more or less of the modern nations of Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Latvia, and Lithuania. Jews could not conduct business outside of the Pale of Settlement. This Pale of Settlement began back in 1791 under Catherine the Great, about 20 years after Russia began seizing these territories in Eastern Europe. During Alexander II's reign, some Jews are allowed to move outside of this Pale of Settlement. This results in Jewish communities forming in Moscow and St. Petersburg. This also elevates Jews economically and socially. However, many of these opportunities end when Alexander II is assassinated. All right, let's talk more about the assassination. Previous assassination attempts on Alexander II by the people's will include a failed attempt to dynamite and derail his train and a failed bombing of the Winter Palace. The bomb that kills Alexander II is actually the second bomb thrown at him that day by people's will assassins. The first is thrown under the Tsar's bulletproof carriage at about 2:15 p.m. He is shaken, but he's unhurt. However, a soldier riding behind his carriage is mortally wounded, and a few others are injured, including a 14-year-old peasant who works as a delivery boy for a butcher's shop and is in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Tsar exits the carriage to survey the damage and exclaims, "Thank God I'm untouched." A second assassin then throws a bomb at Alexander's feet, mortally wounding both the Tsar and his assassin. The Tsar's legs are shattered, his abdomen is ripped open, and his face is mutilated. He is taken by sleigh to the Winter Palace, where he dies about an hour after the bombing at 3:30 p.m. Because people had crowded around the Tsar when he got out of the carriage, the second bomb injures about 20 people. Without any substance, rumors fly that Jews are behind Alexander II's assassination. It is, of course, absurd to think that Jews would have any desire to assassinate the one leader who actually tried to improve their lives. The new Tsar, Alexander III, hates Jews and uses his father's assassination as a premise to institute repressive measures, including undoing many of his father's reforms. This leads to a massive wave of migration, with Jews fleeing Russia and Eastern Europe over the next 3 decades, including to places as far-flung as Argentina, where a colony is established 200 miles west of Buenos Aires. Fans of musical theater will note that Fiddler on the Roof is set during this migration wave about 20 years after Alexander II's assassination. Another interesting note on Alexander II's death. Ironically, on the day of his assassination, Alexander II had signed the Loris-Melikov Constitution, which would have made major reforms to the government by creating 2 legislative commissions made up of elected representatives. Not surprisingly, his son Alexander III rejects this reform measure. He believes, in fact, that his father's liberal policies are the cause of his assassination. Now, I don't want to give the impression that Alexander II was a saint. That he was this perfectly benign leader who always did what was right. He had his share of flaws, including a tawdry marital affair, the political fallout from which forced him to slow many of his reforms. In fact, this backing off of some of his modernization programs leads to the formation of the people's will in the first place. Yet, you cannot deny the fact that Alexander II was a more enlightened leader than other 19th century czars, and that Russia and its people were worse off when he died. All right, well, it's March 13th, so I want to wish happy birthday to my big brother, Cade. Also, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And there are more videos available, including this one right here from March 3rd about Russia's exit from World War I, and this other great video right here. Thanks for watching.